In the last module, we had a look at the registration page. So once you have registered successfully, you should be able to log in. Let's have a look at the sequence of events which happen on the login page. A user puts the username and password. As the username is the email address, we check for the format of the email and the password. If the client-side validation passes, we enable the login button and the user can click to login. If login is unsuccessful, we keep him on the same page with an appropriate message. The files involved in getting this functionality up and working are login.html, which is our main UI, mainController.js, which has the login method, loginservice.js, which actually calls the server side with the login information, logincontroller.java on the server side caters to this particular URL and calls authenticated service impl to go through authenticated service repository and get the user validated. We send the appropriate response back to the client using a logincontroller.java. Let's go through the code and try to understand how this thing can be implemented. When our application loads, our state is home, hence we need to be on our login.html page. Login.html page has its controller as main controller. Let's have a look at login.html first, as it is our main UI. A login.html page has its controller as main controller. So once we click submit, the login method is defined in our main controller. It has our no validate tag, so HTML validations will be ignored. It has username and password fields with our usual validation of a valid username format using pristine and invalid on our email type, and we have a validation for password to be of a minimum length of 8 and a maximum length of 12. Once these validations are through on the client side, we enable our submit button and the user can submit to get entry into our data page. If the username password combination is not found by the server, we give a polite message to the user that username or password is invalid. So let's have a look at main controller, how it handles this data. Our main controller has a login method. It takes the username and password, encapsulates it in data. It then sends this data to the server using the login services login method. If we get a successful response, we assign the response to post data response. If post data response.valid is true, we get the JWT token which is returned by a server and store it in our local storage using the authService.store JWT token method. We also set the field authenticated as true, which is then assigned to the root scope.authenticated, and we make sure that invalid is false as the user is a valid user. As authenticated is true, now we send our user to the data page, else we send the user to the login page. We'll have a look at login service and auth service. Let's first have a look at the login service. Login service has a login method. It takes our data. With the help of a queue service and the HTTP service, it sends the data to the server and resolves the deferred object once we get a successful response from the server, and assigns the response to JWT and valid. We use valid for login and JWT for communication with the server henceforth. Let's have a look at the auth service now. So auth service uses the Windows service. Windows service has local storage. We take the storage and we store our JWT token which we got from the server. This will be used for communication henceforth. We have additional methods to delete the token once we are logging out, to check if it is a valid token, and also to get the token while sending it with the help of a interceptor. So this was the client side. Let's have a look at the server side now. On the server side, the login request is handled by the login controller's login method. It's a post request, and we use the HTTP meta interpreter to parse the data into a user object. We use the authenticate service implementation, and we send the user object to its isValidUser method. Once we get a response as true, we use the authenticate service.get JWT, sending it the user. We put both valid and JWT in a hash map, and we send it to the client. Let's have a look at authenticate service implementation. Authenticate service implementation has isValidUser, which takes the user and with the help of authenticate service repository tries to find the user with the help of the email address. We check if the user is not null, and then use bcrypt to check if the password is correct, the one which was sent by the user and the one which we get from the database with the help of the authenticate service repository. If both are fine, we send a true. Next call goes to get JWT with the user. Here we use jwts.builder. The subject we give here is Angular with Spring MVC. We set the ID as the email address, and we set an expiration date on the token. This expiration date comes in handy as after the stipulated time the token expires and the user has to log in again. This is important if somebody unauthorized gets hold of the token and might use it again and again. To make sure this doesn't happen, we give a expiration time from the current time to an added value. We sign the token with a signature algorithm, giving it a key which is stored in a constant file. Here it is secret at key 123, and we send it to the client. Let's have a look at authenticate service repository. Authenticate service repository extends repository, and we use find by email to get the user from the database. The structure of our user table has ID, email, password and role. So we fetch the user by email. We check the password hash using bcrypt. If everything is fine, we return a valid. So the login controller sends valid as true and JWT as the token. If we don't find the username and password in the repository, we send valid as false. So that's how things work on the server side. See you in the next lesson.